Welcome to Southwest Florida Frontline, the platform where America's first responders, last responders, and military personnel share their stories. This is your platform to share your story, inspire others, and be heard. The views, experiences, and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual speakers and do not represent the official stance of any affiliated organizations or entities. The information is for general informational purposes only and should not be taken as professional advice. We are committed to maintaining the privacy and confidentiality of all guest speakers and participants and adhere to the highest standards of ethical conduct.
Hi, Devon. Thank you so very much for being my guest tonight. Would you mind introducing yourself and tell our audience what you're doing for a living right now?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Kat. My name is Devon, and I am a medico-legal death investigator and autopsy technician for the District 2 Medical Examiner's Office here in Tallahassee, Florida.
What does
Big
that mean?
shoes. Very big shoes to step into, but I investigate all deaths other than natural. So homicides and unfortunately suicides and accidents, drug-related deaths, or even just people who don't have a attending physician. We do a deep dive into their medical history and their social history in order to determine the cause and manner of death. And I'm cross-trained as an autopsy technician, so I get to be hands-on and stinky and gross. But I see so many cool things every single day. It's like the old shows from midnight in the early 2000s, the, ER trip TV shows where they talk about how they ended up in the ER. Unfortunately, the people who don't get to be on those shows come to me. But it's very interesting.
Southwest Florida Frontline, live from the Sunshine State.
And you said cross-trained, so you're also forensic anthropologist, right? And
Yes.
you actually got trained at the university in Tennessee.
Yes.
You worked at the
Yes.
body farm, the famous first body farm. Why
Mhm.
don't we start there? Do you mind, kind of like guiding us through your life and, what brought you there? Why did you
Yeah.
choose forensic anthropology? And then how did you end up becoming a death investigator and cross-trained in autopsy, doing autopsies?
So I was born and lived for a significant portion of my life in the Mississippi Delta. There weren't too many opportunities there, and I kind of stuck out like a sore thumb in what I was interested in. So I didn't really fit in with the other Southern belles around me. But in my teenage years, my grandmother came to live with us because she got diagnosed with cancer. And unfortunately, she did not make it. And in her memory, I was rewatching some of the shows that we used to watch together. Um, for example, Bones. And I remember thinking to myself that that could give me everything that I'm interested in on the true crime front and forensics, but also medicine. Um, as before, I had considered nursing or something in the medical field, having been up so close and personal with my grandmother through her treatments. But this kind of combined the best of both worlds, and we decided that Mississippi didn't have anything for us anymore, and we moved north to Tennessee. And I finished out my sophomore year and my junior and senior year at a high school in a small town there. Um, Lucky for me, the University of Tennessee in Knoxville was right across the state, 5 hours away with the infamous Body Farm. A lot of people know it by the name the Body Farm. Its government name, I'll call it, is the University of Tennessee Forensic Anthropology Research Facility, founded by William M. Bass. Super cool guy. He writes a lot of books under the name Jefferson Bass, if anybody wants to check those out. But a lot of people get introduced to the Body Farm in, ironically enough, the football movie The Blind Side, where he considers going to Tennessee, and his adopted mom goes, "No, you don't want to do that. They have bodies under their football field." Well,
Which is literally true, right?
kind of not. For a few months, there was a storage room under the stadium because they were building the science building where our collection would be archived. So there were maybe 2 or 3 skeletons in there, just while they finished the construction. So kinda true. I don't know if it was during football season though, so I can't attest to anybody playing football over them. But, they don't do the research on or under the football field. It's just across the river.
But the anthropology department is still there and has some skeletal remains there. Because I remember when I visited, it was there and it was actually football season. So there were at
Ooh.
least some skeletons under the football field. So
Well,
thank you for bringing this back to my memory.
yes. The well, the myth is busted. They definitely played football over, skeletons,
Yeah.
which maybe that's where the infamy of our, losing streak comes from. We don't really know.
It's
But we do
cursed.
have a massive building now and a skeletal inventory of almost 3,000 complete skeletons. Last I checked, it might be bigger now. So it was really cool to get to study in such an infamous place. It was the first in the world and the largest in the world for a really, really long time. And now there are bigger facilities, but we still have the largest skeletal collection, and um, we're responsible for founding 4DISC, which is a program used to determine biological profile using sets of measurements from skeletal remains, like the cranial breadth and circumference, or vertebral body height to determine height of an individual at the time of their life. So it's really cool to get to be a part of that history in the making.
Steve Ausley has actually been a friend of mine, of ours. Was married to a German as well.
Mhm.
So we did some research together, and it was quite sad hearing of his passing.
It was very, very sad to hear.
Yeah, but it's so nice that you mentioned for this, because I think what they did really changed, how we do anthropology. Um, I don't know if you want to dive a little deeper into explaining that, also for people who are not from our subject, but I think it's worth, sharing. And then also please tell us what exactly happens at that research facility.
Ooh, okay. So I'll start with 4DISC and then move on to the nitty-gritty interesting stuff. So we determine biological profile with the program 4DISC, and what the biological profile is the age, the sex, and the stature estimation, and less commonly used and a little bit controversial, ancestry or race estimation. Um, I try not to use that. A lot of people try not to use that unless it's absolutely necessary for whichever reason. But it's very controversial. So we're careful, but we use measurements of the axial skeleton to determine height. So femur length or tibia length, and you don't have to measure every single one of them. It uses averages of measurements that are manually input from our skeletal collection. So we're able to find the average, and it gives you ranges. So a height range of maybe 5'11" and 6'2", and that accounts for if someone preferred to walk hunched over, because that affects how people measure them, or if they stood taller, if they maybe shrunk with age. So it's really cool to see stuff like that. But we get our skeletal collection from the stinky little 1 acre patch right across the river from the botanical garden, surrounded by razor wire and I think it's like a 10-foot tall privacy fence. So very secretive for good reason. We like to protect our donors' privacy as best as we can. But what we do is we study the rate and methods and modes of decomposition to apply that information to forensic scenarios, such as like a body dump homicide, especially in a place like Florida where it's very hot and humid. So people tend to decompose a little faster than forensic professionals would like them to do. And not to be crass, but I don't know a better word for decomposition.
And
um,
sorry for interrupting you, but
no, you're good.
just remember, I had a case once where someone went to the grocery store, was seen doing that, and was found deceased the next day outside in Florida during the summer. And that person was almost completely skeletonized. I've never seen that before. And I would not have thought that this is even possible within like literally less than 48 hours. So something in between, like I don't remember exactly, but 24 to 36 hours. It was unbelievable. That was my case.
Goodness.
Otherwise, I would not have believed that, Florida's
Oh my
humidity
gosh.
and insects can decompose someone that quickly. I can't
That's
prepare.
insane. Um, yeah, scavenging and insects, and was it a marshy area by chance? Maybe the
Well,
gases in a marshy type area could have
yeah, it was kind
contributed.
of like so that person had a house kind of like in a very rural woods like
Okay.
area. So I'm pretty sure it was marshy. I do not remember in detail. But she was really seen doing that by the neighbors, and we found groceries and the receipt in the car. So that's why it's confirmed that that was like barely over a day. And
That's
otherwise, I would not have
crazy.
believed that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, kind of on the opposite spectrum of that, I have a weird decomposition story too. So we had a donor, and we didn't get to know too much about the donor's medical history, but not to be crass or insulting, he was a very, very large man, and we placed him out in spring of, I want to say, 2021. And in spring of 2022, he was still mostly intact. His musculoskeletal muscles on his face were gone and the skin up there was gone, but his body was still mostly intact. It was almost mummified and desiccated, but it still held its shape for the most part. It was very interesting to see, and insects weren't doing what they typically do in an outdoor scenario.
You put him on the surface, or how
Mhm.
was he with
He
no
was just
tarp,
on the
nothing,
surface.
no cover at all?
Mm-mm.
And you said which month again?
It was in spring of 2021, I believe, that he was placed, and a year later, or almost a year later, he
He had
was.
all the seasons, right?
Mhm.
That's yeah.
And it was a rainy spring and a very hot, humid summer and a rainy fall with storms and a icy, snowy winter, and then another rainy spring, and he was still mostly intact, and it was kind of crazy. I
And is
really wish I knew.
okay, so no one had an idea why?
They couldn't share the information that could have maybe keyed us in on why to the undergraduates. I believe they were part of some graduate students' medical kind of geared studies. So I really wish I knew if it was, maybe he was on a chemotherapy. I know those are very strong and have strong effects to the bodies, and I can't imagine insects being willing to eat it if they're smelling that, and that's what that person was going through at the time of their death, but I really wish we knew. That stuck with me heavily. I still think about him and often wonder if they've gotten all of the skin off of him yet to see if he's fully skeletonized, because it's been several years at this point. So, I really wish I could go back and ask about that donor specifically, but I can't remember his number.
So does that mean that, once a donor is put out there and does not decompose as expected, the body will most likely remain? Or what, do you guys do when the research on one person is over or completed? What happens with
So,
the remains?
I believe their next steps, that they were at least spitballing the idea of doing a burial in an area of the research facility that was a little bit closer to water to see if a higher moisture content would increase the decomposition. Um, After, I think it's 18 months maximum. I could be wrong on that, but I vaguely remember somebody saying that about 18 months maximum. They do get recovered from the research facility, and that's an entire class that's completely recovered by undergraduates with the assistance of teaching assistants and professors. And what we do there is pick up everything bone by bone. You can't pick up more than one at at the same time. You have to do it bone by bone and document everything very thoroughly. But it was a team effort, and oftentimes we were, moving hair mats out of the way and desiccated skin and tissue and ligaments and tendons and things like that that are a little bit more resilient to the elements and insects. So after we pick everything up, we take it inside of the research facility and we, depending on what's left, we might put them in a maceration pot or we move them over to the racks for the undergraduate processing class to clean them. And our goal is to clean them where you can touch them barehanded. So picking every little bit of adipocere, any maggot casings, any desiccated tissues off of them, and scrubbing them very, very gently with soft bristled toothbrushes, using dental picks, being very careful not to displace any natural formation and morphology of the bone or disturb any of the taphonomic scavenging processes or weathering or anything. So we try to leave them in the exact condition that we found them, except clean enough to touch barehanded. After that, they end up in our collection inside of the oh, it's been too long. I can't remember the name of my science building. Strong Hall, inside of Strong Hall, where we keep our collection to be used by the forensic osteology classes and human osteology, comparative osteology, and various medical classes use our skeletal collection. So they all get migrated from one side of campus to the other, and we get to use them in research. Families do have the option to pick up the skeletal remains or cremains at that point if they choose to have them cremated. It's really a remarkable program that offers families an alternative way for a disposition or carry out their loved ones' wishes to be researched. So it's super cool, and we are very respectful to our donors. But people from all over the country contract through the University of Tennessee to be a part of their donor program. So much that I think there's actually a wait list because of the land restraint right now. We don't have the capacity to put everybody out that wants to be put out when they pass away, if everybody were to pass away at once, and goodness forbid that happen. Oh my gosh. But it's kind of interesting that people want to be that involved in science to the point where they become the science themselves.
Have you ever spoken to a donor when they filled out the documentation and, to hear what exactly they are feeling and why they want this?
Not any donors of the University of Tennessee, but I do know several individuals who at least considered the possibility when they pass away in hopefully many, many years of being a body donor to an anthropology facility or even a cadaver lab for medical students and anatomy and physiology classes. Um, I think they just wanted to do something different, but they also are really scientifically minded individuals. So they wanted to do something different and become a part of the thing they love so much to the point that other people can learn to love it, hopefully, from what they're providing to the forensic field or the medical field.
So here's my question, though, and I'm asking this for a reason because we have body donors in Germany as well, and we use them for medical students to learn anatomy. And we have the same phenomenon that, all of a sudden we had so many people wanting to donate their body to science or to medicine that we had a waiting list. And while I appreciated this much because that helped with my education, and I think it's a really meaningful purpose, and it's good for our students that we have that and that people are donating voluntarily. But I was asking myself, what do I want as a forensic anthropologist? Would I want my would I want to donate my body, to science? Or another question that I was asking myself repeatedly was, would I want to have an earth burial? so that my skeletal remains at some point, are it might end up in the hands of anthropologists as well. And I honestly have to admit that even though I appreciate that and I love, my job and, examining human remains, I think when it comes to my own remains, I don't know if I could do it. And then I'm asking myself, why? Why am I passionate about it, but I wouldn't allow it with my own remains? And I have no answer. So therefore, what would you do? Do you know that for you? Have you thought about that?
I have thought about it, and I have decided that if I have children, I will express what I am hopeful that they will do, but in the form of options. I'm completely okay with being a medical or scientific donor. Um, and the funny thing about me is I'm a huge prankster to my friends and family. So under the stipulation that they have to pick up my skeleton whole. I don't want to be cremated if that's the case. You have to pick up my skeleton whole. If my purpose was to become something to be studied as an individual, as every single piece of me, all 200, and I think I have 210. I have some random sesamoid bones, but um, if I was meant to be studied as a whole, I want to be picked up as a whole and put in a really cool little box or something somewhere. It can be in a closet, or I'm completely fine with being cremated, or buried at sea. Sounds kind of cool. Just something other than people standing over my corpse. That's what makes me more uncomfortable, in a casket where, they do you up, and it's great for a lot of families. I personally just couldn't stand the idea of someone standing over me going, "The mortician did such a good job with you," or my daughter going, "She didn't even like that color lipstick. Why did they put that on?" Or, "That's not even her skin tone." So I would rather not be looked at like that if I have to be looked at. I would rather be looked at as, "Oh, cool, she had sesamoid bones in her hands," or "Look at the lungs on her." I don't know, something, educational and not meant to be judgmental or observant for the wrong reasons. And I think a lot of people started wanting to donate their body more because of the prevalence of true crime in media now. You can watch murder trials on TV, the entire things. So people get to hear about the forensics and the behind the scenes. And I think a lot of people started to realize, like, wow, that's way cooler than the fictional HBO crime dramas and stuff that you watch, or forensic shows that you watch that are completely fictional. So I think that kind of sparked a lot of people being interested in donating their body to further what people could learn in a trial setting.
And also, without those donors, forensic methods weren't what they are today. So we couldn't solve some crimes if it wasn't for those donors, where we, could take those measurements and develop those methods and programs like FORDIS, for example. So
Mm,
there's so
absolutely.
much value in it. And like you said earlier, it is done in a very ethical manner and only, voluntarily. However, I think it's really, and I think it's probably a more complex and kind of spiritual question. And if, in my case, of what I believe is there after death, but that kind of like brings me to the um topic of grief, that, because you talked about the charming little thing that you want to bring into your own funeral, once at some point when you will pass away, because I mean, obviously we cannot live forever, unfortunately. um and I actually like that, because I feel like that might help with the grief of your relatives, and knowing how hard grief can hit us, or can hit the next of kin and loved ones when we had those cases. How do you handle that? I mean, because that to me that was being exposed to that, and when they have this very vulnerable moment in a very traumatic situation, that can be hard at times.
So I think back to my own grief. I was exposed to death at a very young age, unfortunately, at 9, when my grandfather and grandmother and myself were traveling across the country, and he unfortunately suffered a massive heart attack and passed away in Montana. Um, that was a really kind of harrowing moment for me, and it made me morbidly curious, but I was so angry. Um, because that was my hero. That was my grandpa. That's, he taught me how to ride a bike and bounced me on his lap and took me to the ice cream store up the street on his motorcycle, and that was my hero. I loved him with every bit of my being, and I lost him suddenly. So that changed my perspective, and I started looking at it in a more scientific manner, because the answer I didn't have was why. I was way too young to understand that he had health issues. He was in his 70s, and I know that now, but at 9 years old, I mean, we just did a hike. A healthy person hikes, not a sick person, and sick people are the only kind of people that die. Is at that time, I only ever heard of elderly people passing away at that age. Um, so I think back to that grief and how angry I was, and then moving forward, losing my grandmother to cancer, and she lived with us. I was in the house when that happened, and it was on April 1st. So it was very sad to know that that happened, to hear the monitor flatline, and within minutes, it was almost like grief and humor go hand in hand in a way, because we all realized it was April Fool's Day, and my grandmother had waited until just after midnight to pass away on April Fool's Day, which was very much like her personality. Um, I found humor in that. It was like, she had to have the last word or say in everything, and here she was. She got us. Got us. She absolutely got us. And I was still angry, but I found more humor in it. I was angry more because the treatment was supposed to have an 85% chance of success, and she fell within the 15% mortality rate. That really bothered me because, again, at 15, I didn't understand the medicine behind it, and I didn't understand the staging and the severity, and everybody tiptoed around me like I was a little kid who was incapable of understanding anything medical or grief related. Um, so I again started rewatching stuff that we used to watch together, like Grey's Anatomy, and very, very, very dramatic show. Good entertainment value, very dramatic though. And then Bones, which was again very dramatized, but I couldn't see myself doing anything that wasn't forensic or medical, because that gave me the answers that I needed, and I wanted to give other people those same answers. So when I deal with a grieving family now, I think back to why I got into doing what I'm doing, helping people, giving people answers that they wouldn't get if the medical examiner's office wasn't involved. I would rather someone be a little sad and know than inconsolable with no answers for the rest of their life. I get yelled at and screamed at sometimes, and I get called hateful things, and it's all part of grief. And then I also have grieving mothers crying on the phone with me and interacting with me on a much more personal level than one would expect. And you have to separate it professionally and be compassionate and not let yourself get too overwhelmed, because they can't be strong in those moments. So I think people should make it a goal in my position to be their strength, at least for the duration of that phone call. So I always think back to my grief. When I get yelled at, I'm very sorry for your loss. I really wish I could tell you more right now, but I can't. And you just kind of have to talk them through it. And I find that by the time the case is getting closed, they're much more receptive to speaking with you. And they're much more thankful for what you did. And they're not screaming at you. They're calling to discuss results with you and sending Christmas cards to your office. And that makes it worth it completely. So rewarding.
I can absolutely agree and relate. And it's also wonderful how you pointed out the different facets that this job comes with. It's not just, analyzing something analytically and doing the best that you can to solve a crime or to solve someone's, what happened to someone. It's also having a lot of compassion for those grieving family members. And that can be hard. And I have been there myself, and if I could, I would always allow that they say goodbye, because sometimes that's the last moment where they can hug their loved one. And it is hard. And I remember that, especially some law enforcement coworkers, it is hard for them to allow that. But ultimately, luckily, it is our call at the scene. And as long as it's not a homicide or anything that can be compromised, why not? Because you can never go back in time. And, if you take that moment away, it's gone. And I felt like the same way. It's like I'm strong for that family, because to me, very unfortunately, it's a normal work day. I can come home and my life is still okay. I can come home and have a nice evening. They can't.
Mm-mm. No, they absolutely can't. And it it sounds crass and cruel to say it's just a normal work day, but it is. And a lot of people, when interacting with me, I notice they're inquisitive about what I do and how my day is, but oftentimes it leaves them looking disgusted or distraught. And, "Oh, are you okay?" That I'm doing okay. That it I hate it for the family. It doesn't matter how I'm doing. I am doing exactly what I was put on this planet to do. I don't think I could see myself doing anything else. Um, so yeah, it is just another day at the office for us, but to them, it's life-changing information, and to the families, it's I get to go home and in the future one day, hug my family, and there are people that get to go home for the first time and don't get to hug their someone. So it's a double-edged sword in a way.
And I remember those moments that you described when someone asked you, "What are you doing for a living?" And then you know exactly when I say this, you will see a specific expression in their face, and then they will ask you, "Oh God, aren't you traumatized?" And then you have to justify why you still love that job, even though
Mhm.
it comes with like cruel images and terrible smells and very traumatic interpersonal things. Um, but I feel like you said in a very wonderful way that this is, what you were meant to do on this planet. And I kind of like felt the same way, but it's so hard to explain to someone who just, I don't know, thinks this is a traumatizing job.
Mhm.
So how do you explain that? Yes, it is traumatizing, but it's also a very rewarding job, and it's a very interesting job from a scientific or analytic perspective.
So I try to get people into my mindset and kind of mentally in my shoes for a second when I have to kind of compare how my life is also just a normal life. I'm just a 26-year-old girl, and I went to college and I'm paying off debt, and I did all of the things that normal girls did. And um so I try to put them in my shoes. If you think that your sole purpose is to find answers for someone and you're in the situation where someone passed away suddenly, it's a younger person. If you want to help that family, aren't you going to look into every single avenue? You're going to hyper focus on your task at hand. It's not about how we feel. So I kind of walk them through a makeshift case scenario. And sometimes they're still not quite understanding how I'm not traumatized. And I have to frame it a little bit differently, and it's okay if you were a parent and your child, or your adult child, hopefully, if any, suddenly passes away. Wouldn't you want someone who is absolutely hyper focused on the why and the how everything happened? You would want those answers. You wouldn't be able to sleep for months unless you had those answers. Would you not want someone whose sole purpose and interest in life is to explore every single avenue of what happened to the most important to you, most important person to you in your life? And then well, yeah. And wouldn't you want that person to be calm and level headed and compassionate when speaking with you? Or would you want them to seem traumatized? Traumatized people don't think clearly. If I got traumatized every single time I got sad and shut down, I wouldn't be in this field. I wouldn't have a job. I would have not had a job after my first month there, because it comes at you fast and hard, and you just have to brace. And I'm capable of it. I have the stomach for it, and I have the mentality for it. So I brace, and they tend to understand a little bit more when it's framed in that what if it were you or your loved one situation.
But isn't it interesting that majority of the employees in this line of work are women?
Yes. Um, I wish there was true blue science behind it, but my theory is that women are made biologically to withstand so much. I mean, we're meant for child rearing. There's a lot of gross stuff that goes into bringing a life into this world in a very real medical way and even anthropological way. So I think we're just made to handle more pain mentally and physically, and we're made to handle the gross fluids and smells, because if we have children as women, then that's what we get, is the mental pain and the physical pain and the gross smells and fluids and nastiness. And I think we're just kind of made for it, or morbidly curious. I've never known a woman that wasn't nosy. And I say that with the highest respect, because a nosy woman is often an educated one. And whatever way they seek to be, they're often educated women. And I can respect that. So, nosy people, macabre people, even if you just want to do it because it's edgy and that fits your aesthetic, if you learn something from it and you respect this field, then by all means. I think it's a bit of an enigma how we end up here. Is men are the traditionally, well, they can withstand more pain and they have a higher pain tolerance. No, they do not. No, they do not. I'm sorry. Girl power here. No,
Oh,
they
I,
do
I
not.
agree. I agree. So I have the same thoughts. And I mean, even if we can't prove it scientifically, but at least, we are entitled to have that opinion. And I
Hmm.
mean, it is a fact that no matter which country, it's a job that women choose,
Hmm.
It's, so
Absolutely. And
there must be a reason. And then it's
a good example of how it's just a day in the life for a woman versus like law enforcement, a male detective that comes in. Um, there's been times where I've been assisting with an autopsy and have removed organs, more notable um, boys' favorite parts that have to come out. And it's kind of funny to see somebody go from their normal skin color to really pale really fast. Not to the point that they're going to pass out, but it's like they're taking note of just how easy that was to do and the fact that a girl just did it. And we might be listening to
and
like Katy
partly
Perry.
with your bare hands, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
literally just, yeah.
Yep, just gloves. We're like da 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 da. Just another day. I'm singing Taylor Swift and also taking out someone's kidney, and we're still interacting professionally, but we don't want to be sad because we would get distracted and focused on the wrong parts of what our job entail if we were sad. So we keep it upbeat and light, and all the girls, and well, Dr. Coyne is also an enigma, but that man is interested in everything. Um, There are a few men that are cut out for it, but I interact with way more women in the forensic field, in the mortuary field in general. I interact with a lot of women in body transport too, so it's kind of the proof is in the pudding. I'll just put it that way. The proof is in the pudding.
Southwest Florida Frontline, live from the Sunshine State.
But coming back or going back to the body farm, do you remember the first time you were exposed to decomposing remains and how that was for you?
Yes, very distinctly. So I started at the University of Tennessee in August of 2020. So this was right in the middle of COVID quarantine. So I didn't get to interact with anybody, and I was looking for more opportunities to be involved because I couldn't take a lot of my lab-based classes that I really, really needed. And I went to a community college first, so I was only doing the classes that were required for my degree at that point. All of my general education was out of the way. So I reached out to the directors of the body farm and inquired about any volunteer opportunities. And at that point, I was willing to do anything. I mean, do you need people to clean the bones? I don't know what you do, but because I've never been here before, but do you need people to clean the bones? Do you need people to pick up the bones? I'm willing, just please let me near the bones in a very forensic and professional and educational way. Please let me near the bones. And they reached out to me and informed me of something called the daily photo. So every day, graduate students conducting their thesis research go out there and they have a specific donor, specific set of donors that they take measurements on, height, tissue mass. There's a few photographs taken of them, and they always ask an undergraduate if they can to, pull back the tarps on some of them because some of them are tarped, and put the measuring poles down and take all of the samples and stuff that they need because they are writing and they're taking photos with a very expensive camera, so they don't want to get their hands dirty. And I was more than fine getting my hands dirty. So they reached out to me. It was a random Wednesday night when her name was Helen. She was conducting research on 3 of the donors. One of them was a water decomposition. So that was trial by fire. She asked me to meet her at 7 a.m. and dropped a pin to the parking lot because there's no true address for it. And it's kind of hard to get to the body farm if you've never been in that general part of campus before. So she dropped a pin to the parking lot and I followed it there. And there it was. And she pulled up, and it was later in that fall semester. So the lock was frozen and we sat out there with our hot hands massaging the lock and unfreezing it and taking turns rubbing our hands together with it and kind of laughing and talking about music while we, didn't have any schoolwork yet because of the frozen lock. When we got inside, though, she showed me the shed and she showed me all of the PPE and walked me through the protective part of what we're supposed to do to keep ourselves healthy and safe. So no pokes and no weird fluids and open wounds and bioenzyme cleaners and cavicide and, simple green and all of the fun, really weird smelling chemicals that get used in this field. She showed me the poles and she instructed me how to use them for her. So I would uncover the bodies and take her measurements and let her do her photos and cover them back up and move on to the next. And I remember thinking, I didn't expect it to smell like ammonia because it smelled kind of like ammonia in that specific scene. And I was like, that isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Because I really thought I was going to move that tarp and then throw up on this poor donor and feel horrible and decide, maybe I could go to law school or something, something that doesn't require bodily fluids and nastiness. But I didn't. I was like, oh, okay, it's a new smell. It's an interesting smell. I can adjust for a second. And now I feel like if I was walking through the woods and smelled that specific smell, I would be able to, like a bloodhound, take you to where it was and then have to explain to the cops, no, I just knew it was a dead person based on the way it smells. So that's a an unreasonable fear that I think some of us have in this field. Like, how do I explain that I knew this dead body was here because of the smell? So I focused a lot on the smell for some reason because I just didn't expect it to smell like industrial ammonia type cleaner and garbage and roadkill. Not to be disrespectful to the donors, but ooh.
But since you mentioned this example, I remember that every time I go for a hike somewhere or I see something on the side of the road, it's like, oh my God, that's perhaps a dead body. Can't get it out of your head. And then I had the same thought. It's like, okay, if I find a dead body, how do I explain that if it's skeleton remains, I can tell them kind of immediately if this is a female, a male, the age estimate.
You can
How do I
conduct
explain that?
the initial investigation. Absolutely. No, it, I think it would be a cool and strange scenario to find yourself in, but that's another one of those, wow, this is kind of cinematic. You would expect to see something like this on TV. The scenario where you or me as a forensic anthropologist walks up and is like, oh my gosh, that's a human. Um, that's high velocity trauma and that's antemortem trauma and that's perimortem trauma and having called law enforcement. And I'm like, yeah, so this is the information I have for you so far. Don't worry. I picked everything up already and used gloves and all of that stuff. But I put it back down exactly how it was. So your photos are safe. And then get stuck in a very long interview, probably at a station somewhere.
Defending
Lord
yourself.
forbid.
It wasn't me though.
Yeah, I pinky promise. I pinky promise it wasn't me. Or Lord forbid I ever walk up on a deceased individual that still has tissue, because that's a lot harder to be like, it wasn't me, I swear. Depending on what stage of decomposition or how close to the time of death it is, or what is it? The postmortem interval, I believe, is the fancy way of saying it, the postmortem interval. So depending on how close to that it was, it's like, I can promise you this wasn't me, but I can also tell you I've noticed these healing bruises and this individual had a propensity for self-harm, or he had a pill bottle that fell out of his pocket when I checked his pulse or something like that. I hope to never find myself in that situation. It would be so cool. It would be a pain in my rear. And if it was in any of my 10 counties, it would completely take me off of the case. So it would be a conflict of interest. I would be way too involved. That would kind of hinder things and that would upset me not being able to do my job. But having already been through half of the investigation, waiting on law enforcement kind of deal.
Southwest Florida Frontline, live from the Sunshine State.
What would you guess? How many cases have you seen throughout your career so far?
My cases specifically or in general?
In general. Because I know that even if it's not your case, you're still exposed and you're still assisting, or you're
Yes.
seeing things.
Okay, so we had 699 last year, and we had 765, I think, in 2024. So if we round it up to 800 and 700, that's 1,500 cases. And then I worked the entirety of the month of December in 2023. My start date was December 4th, and we probably did 100-ish cases. So maybe 1,600 cases total. Well, no, I forgot this year. And as of yesterday, we were at 100 and we'll ballpark it at 150. I think it was 145.
So closer
to 2,000 cases.
And do you still remember a case that stuck out or stuck with you?
Ooh. A really cool one that I didn't expect to be as involved as I was in it. I got a random call one day from Tallahassee Police Department. Most of them knew me and knew my background and knew that I kind of messed with bones a little bit. So they called me directly and inquired about me being able to come to a scene. first time ever that I've been asked to a scene, as my office is a little small and we just don't have the staff to do scene attendance right now. So they asked me to come do a scene and explained that they had found, or some kids were playing in a wooded area that had been kind of torn up by a tornado. So there were down trees making cool little tunnels and hollows and stuff for kids to climb on and in and around, and a wooden walkway that was kind of upturned and kind of just gnarled a little bit. But some kids were back there playing and found a set of skeletal remains. And they just knew somehow that it was a pirate, obviously. And they went and told their dad, who went back with them to, see this pirate that their kids or his kids found. And they was like, "Oh, okay. You actually found a skeleton." Called law enforcement, and law enforcement called me. So we were out there for 4 or 5 hours, and it was September. It was, ooh, just before an ice storm, kind of, and Hurricane Helene. So we had really, really low temperatures, and then a front that came through that turned into Hurricane Helene, unfortunately. So it was kind of an interesting, kind of surreal moment, because I got there and it's already getting darker earlier and the temperatures are dropping. And there's really no good way to dig through a marsh to uncover muddy, goopy skeletal remains, from what is essentially an anthropologist's nightmare situation if they have to recover. Mud eats everything. Unless you have the equipment and the manpower to dig out every bit of mud, because it's fluid at some point when there's more water. So that's a really, really large area to excavate. So you have to do the best with what you have. And we had hand sifters and our hands.
And also,
So
it
we
is
spent
Florida,
hours.
so you need to watch out for, snakes and
Mhm. Yes.
Right.
Thankfully, it was too cold for the snakes. And it was dry enough in the sense that there wasn't much standing water that we wouldn't have been eaten by an alligator, because we would have heard them sloshing through the mud. Thank goodness. Um, it was a little surreal, though, experiencing the temperature drop and it's getting dark. We're working by two random, God bless them, and thank the Lord for them, two random officers just holding flashlights for us. It's me and another forensic tech, and the best way to recover in that situation is just in gloved hands. You need to be able to feel. So I couldn't really have a warm layer on, or I wouldn't have been able to feel anything. Um, we were able to recover about 90% of these skeletal remains, and we went back out another week later to see if we could find anything else, and ended up finding one more long bone. So that was great, that we even found any more after another storm had come through and completely rearranged the area. But the remains were found under an overturned, elevated wooden walkway. It was part of a park once before the tornado initially messed it up. So we got the remains back, after all these storms, and went out again and got it back to the office. And I spent a whole day cleaning with toothbrushes and teeny tiny picks. And I prefer the plastic dental picks just to not damage the periosteum, to see, firstly, if there's still periosteum, then they're a little bit fresher than would, bones that have completely dried out, at least at some point in their decomposing time. So I spent a whole day giving a skeleton a bath and laying him out in anatomic position and taking an obscene amount of photographs, because that's how it was in school. So I was like, okay, I'll just go by the standard that I was taught on, and it was super in depth. Still trying to get 4 disc for my office, so working on that one. But we did bring in an anthropologist, Dr. Tice, I believe, at that point, who came and looked at all of the remains for us and wrote us a very thorough report and did her measurements. And I believe she ran it through 4 disc, to get the biological profile. Um, Ultimately, we were able to identify that individual after putting DNA into the system, and eventually we got a hit, and we were able to find this person's family. So that was really interesting and cinematic and a great thing to be a part of. Because that's the stuff that they used as like the crazy hypotheticals in school. Like one day you're not going to be expecting it and you're going to get called to this scene and all the conditions are going to be horrible. It's going to start raining on you and it's going to be cold and wet and gross and it's going to get swampy. And it's the nightmare situation that they give you as an example of how you need to work effectively and quickly in those situations when you're in school. So it was like, I didn't think this would happen.
Especially with a hurricane approaching.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. And I mean, you could feel the pressure difference in the air too. So it was just everything made it more movie-like. There aren't many moments where it feels like TV. We don't get results super quick overnight like on TV, but there are a few iconic even moments that feel like it should have been televised or redacted and then televised. So it's it's
and
been amazing to do it.
do you know, or are you allowed to share if that was like something self-inflicted or interpersonal violence or a medical event?
Honestly, if I remember correctly, we went with undetermined cause and manner of death, due to there being no significant trauma to the skeletal remains that would have contributed to his death. There was actually no peri or postmortem trauma to the remains. There was a few antemortem remodeled fractures in some of the smaller hand and feet bones, and one of the ribs. He was probably a younger person based on the clothing that was found kind of around him, a smaller statured individual. He was between 35 and 50 years old, and um, he was known to smoke tobacco and drink alcohol frequently. So we can kind of assume based on where he was that maybe he was walking and intoxicated and fell in when the water was high and potentially drowned, but we don't have a good way to see that in the bones, unfortunately, at this point. It'd be cool if science got there, though. That would be very interesting, especially in Florida. Um, so it was kind of oof, everything lined up and happened all at once, and I got to use every single facet of my degree, and then my death investigation training, and also my processing skills. So it was really cool to be involved in every step.
And how is this for you if you do not find full closure with a case like this one, so that you just don't know what exactly happened? Can you let it go and let this rest, or is this nagging you?
Mm, In a way, it nags me for a few weeks after the fact, just because I don't like unanswered questions, but I have adapted and learned how to let them go, unfortunately.
Yeah, because you said that, the desire of finding answers brought you into this field, and I
Mhm.
relate to that. And I know that this would drive me crazy. Not, all those cases where we didn't know. I just,
Mhm.
it's hard to let it go.
Yeah, it is. I've gotten a little bit better at letting the question marks go. I give myself closure in saying, okay, well, there was no major trauma to this individual. Hello, Ollie.
There's a cat.
Yes,
Another
Ollie. He's
cat.
a Velcro kitty and hates when he's not the center of attention. You need to chill out, dude. Like really chill out. Um, where was I?
Finding answers. Letting
Yes.
go when you
Yes.
know.
I find comfort in knowing that, okay, there's no mass trauma to this person. Or we didn't find needles and baggies of black tar heroin on scene or anywhere near this person. So I force myself almost to believe that this was a natural event, or if it was something that I couldn't see in the bones, maybe it happened really quick and he didn't feel anything. So I've gotten to the point where I gaslight myself into believing that it was a quick and painless passing for the individuals.
And if you would have one advice for future forensic anthropologists or death investigators, what would this be? Something that might have helped you, in the beginning.
Ooh. If you want to get into death investigation, try your hardest to get into medical oriented classes too. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's a lot of times, even if there's not trauma, police are going to make a big hubbub about a unsuspected or what they would call a suspicious death. So it has come in handy to have that medical terminology and a little bit of a medical background um, under my belt. It a lot more than one would think when you get into a forensics program or forensic oriented program. They don't really do medical stuff. Those are expensive classes for students to take. But if you ever get the opportunity or you can weasel your way into a medical oriented class, it will help you more often than you think it will.
And since you mentioned those situations at the scene with law enforcement, did you encounter a situation where you felt like you have to prove your worth, or you have to do something to get their respect? Was it hard?
Yes, I definitely take it a little bit personal, because I know with my whole soul that this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and I went to school specifically for this. I went out of my way and spent extra money on medical classes, as well as some crime scene forensic oriented classes, as well as my anthropology. So I made myself well rounded, and I'm young and I'm a girl, and a lot of law enforcement are guys, and they are older and they are seasoned, and they don't like being told that they're wrong. Um, but that's really unfortunate because it's one of my favorite things to do is tell them they're wrong and then prove it. Um, we have to walk them through exactly what medical history means when they tell it to us because they read it like it's a bulleted list. Oh, well, this person smoked weed a lot, and I know there's this recent thing where people can die from that. Okay, well, did it look like they ate a pound of it? If the answer is no, they probably did not overdose on marijuana. Or they can smoke marijuana. It doesn't have to kill them. That's chronic, natural, unless it's laced with something. But, is there any indication that it's an OD? Does it look like someone who would have been overdosing? Did they vomit on themselves or their phone? Or, well, they're taking this medicine and I Googled it and it says it's for high cholesterol. Okay. That's not enough to kill him. Okay. Well, when you have high cholesterol, you develop atherosclerosis. Well, I don't know what that is. Okay. It is like putting your thumb over a water hose. It raises your blood pressure, which makes your heart work extra hard. And that can be caused, in the very beginning by your diet and also smoking tobacco and drinking constantly and sedentary lifestyle. And you have to baby step them through it. And it's kind of fun to do. And I have found that now that I'm a little bit more confident in what I say and I'm not so green at this, that they have started to respect me more. So speak with confidence. If you're saying something, be sure of it and say it with your whole chest. Be confident when you say it. That's the only way to get the respect of people who feel that you are less or you know less than them just because they have experience. As a death investigator, they don't have the same experience as you. They're not looking at the same things as you. Law enforcement levies charges. They find out the whodunit, and we found out the howdunit.
Was
So
exactly
it's
those
different.
situations that you described that made me step into becoming confident. Because you have to make ad hoc decisions while being surrounded, sometimes in a kind of like observative, partly hostile environment where you have to prove yourself. But you know exactly if I make a mistake, that has consequences, not just for my career, but especially for the person that I'm the voice for right now and the person's loved ones. So I can't mess it up because especially if it's a homicide, I want this to go to trial without me doing a mistake or making a mistake.
Absolutely.
And that kind of decision making, I think, forced me to become confident and trusting, my thoughts, trusting my decisions. And with that, in my opinion, comes real confidence. But it was hard. I was an introvert. I was more on the shy side. I was very harsh on myself. And when it comes to my self-worth, no matter how great my education was, and my accomplishments that I had, I I don't know. I didn't believe in myself, but you have to, because otherwise that job is not the right job for you.
No, it's not. And it's not just law enforcement. So if law enforcement can be representative by jocks, and not that they all are, but just the stereotype, and the kind of people that like to speak down to people who do what I do and who are young women and who don't have as much experience as the 25, 30-year career law enforcement. It's also the nerds, the brainiacs in the hospitals, the doctors.
No, exactly. Can
They
even be the people in your own office. So I didn't
My goodness,
necessarily
yes.
mean law enforcement. I've met wonderful people, and I have friends working in law enforcement. But I feel like it's a field where confidence is so necessary, and you need to find it within yourself. And I really feel like making decisions no matter what the environment is, how hostile the environment is, and trusting and believing into yourself. That's the key for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's such a big determination to be in charge of too. The how did they die and why did they die? That's a huge decision. You have to be confident in it. Do you want the person who's writing your loved one's death certificate to be like, well, it might have been this? That's not very confidence inspiring. That seems fishy to me. That would upset me greatly. I would cause a big fuss. I don't really have any people in my office, thankfully, who are condescending. We all bounce ideas off of each other, so that's really cool. And I'm blessed to be in an environment where I can bounce my ideas off of my co-investigators. And Dr. Coyne, the chief medical examiner, who's absolutely amazing as a teacher and a mentor and a boss, just all around good time professional guy who is very proud of what he does and how he presents his business and his place as medical examiner. And it really inspires myself and my co-investigator to be proud of what we do too. And we're not representative of just ourselves. We're representative of the medical examiner's office, and we're representative of Dr. Coyne, who has to sit on the stand and testify to the information we provide to him. If we give him the wrong information and it doesn't line up and he's on the stand saying stuff that's not related at all, then that looks really bad on him and on the office and on us. I would be humiliated. I'm blessed to be in the environment where we bounce ideas off of each other, and I'm super blessed to have developed confidence, even if it was a rough and bumpy introduction. But if you let people walk all over you, they're going to think it's okay to do that. So if you have a little attitude or a little fiery temper, you still respect them and you put your foot down, but also educate them so they don't do this again in the future and they don't mistake one thing for another thing again in the future. So I try to educate as many people as I can when I speak with them, especially the people who have more experience than me. If I can share something I know that they don't, then they've come out of our interaction a better professional too. Even doctors, they don't teach doctors how to sign death certificates in school, just hospice doctors, which is absolutely obscene to me because it has led doctors to believing that they're not legally required to if the patient wasn't right in front of them when they passed away. That, to me, is an egregious misstep in medical education. So when I interact with the doctors who try to tell me the statutes and why they legally don't have to sign, and try to tell me that the 75-year-old who smoked tobacco their whole life didn't have any medical history to kill them and that I should be signing that death certificate as an ME representative, I educate them. I walk them through the disease process, and they don't like being told anything about disease processes because I didn't go to medical school and they did. But they have let themselves get singular minded to keeping patients alive, and they don't tie in the what happens if they're non-compliant or any other external factors, even natural processes. So they don't necessarily like that up front, but they typically stew on it a little bit and decide, okay, no, it actually does make sense that they have atherosclerosis and it caused a stroke. Even though they were at home and transported and it DOA, but imaging came back, all of that, this makes sense. So to me, that them admitting that it actually makes a little sense and coming around to, okay, I'll sign that death certificate. That makes them a better doctor and that makes me a better investigator. And it makes me more competent when I speak to anybody that has more experience or more education than I do.
And what was this a learning curve, or did you enter the field already being that confident and setting boundaries and speaking?
It was a learning curve professionally. I've always been boneheaded and strong-willed and not so soft-spoken, but go through your entire college experience with every single thing you do, even the things you do right, being nitpicked, and the professors are telling you everything you did wrong on it. And it's not to make you feel down, it's to make you better. And I understand that, but it does affect the confidence coming out of school and them telling you something was wrong, but not correcting it or teaching you why it was wrong. So I did have to learn that a little bit professionally. Um, when I said something, I had to say it confidently. I researched tremendously in the weeks leading up to my move to Florida to start my job. I looked up the Florida statutes that I needed to know. And I really, really tried to drill those into my head because a misstep with the statutes is illegal. I couldn't be signing death certificates I wasn't statutorily required to do. Or even if it's a motor vehicle accident from 5 years ago and someone passes of complications of that, if there's criminal charges, they have to come in for a physical examination. So you have to find out that stuff kind of ahead of time. Um, you gotta know your stuff. It's good to research. Um, Especially when you go into a field full of type A individuals. There aren't very many type B people in this field that I've met, and all of the people I've interacted with have been loud and exceptionally flamboyant in everything they do, and it's been wonderful seeing that, okay, I don't feel so weird about myself. Seeing that everybody else is just as happy and they can eat lunch after autopsy too. I'm not a freak, thank goodness. There's just a lot of us. Maybe we're all a little freaky, or maybe everyone else is just too normal.
Devon, I thank you so very much for sharing those very honest thoughts, experiences, because I feel like there's so much value in you sharing who you are as it is in you sharing what this job is about. And I hope that there are many, many future forensic specialists, whether, someone goes into pathology or death investigation, forensic anthropology, who hopefully got inspired and who learned that, it's not just about the job, it's also about you being you, believing in yourself, accepting that every one of us is different and none of us is crazy. We are just unique and very lovely human beings. And I like how passionate you shared all those thoughts and experiences. Yeah, and I can't thank you enough for being on this show and having been my guest tonight.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the invite. It came as a surprise because I don't hold a higher degree than a bachelor's, and it made me feel honored and really warmed my heart to know that I had impacted at least one person enough for them to want me to share my opinions and my thoughts and how I got into this field. So I really appreciate it. And this has been an amazing opportunity for me as well.
It's not about a degree. It's about your personality. And I'm saying this with like a smile because I've been there myself and I never felt good enough, but we start somewhere and you already have a bachelor and that is not defining you. The energy that you had here, um, your passion, your thoughtfulness, your empathy, that is what defines you. And I thank you for your kind words, but I wish that one day you see yourself through my eyes and you see in yourself what I saw and what I'm still seeing. And again, I think, there's so much value in what you shared. And if it only inspires one other person, maybe even one other young female, then I feel like this podcast served its purpose. And I could not have done this without you, because this episode here definitely lives from your energy and your passion and from, Devon being Devon. So thank you so very much.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for having me. And I think the I just have a bachelor's feeling is just the part of it. Only being 2 years in, I think I'll have a few more. Well, that's unexpected because of reasons X, Y, and Z moments. But I'm very glad that I've gotten this one out of the way, and it's done nothing but make public speaking easier for me and make me more confident in speaking. And I do hope that I inspire plenty of young men and women out there to at least look into forensics and medicine.
You
Your story matters. Reach out to us at SWFLfrontline@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music under @SWFL Frontline.